Can I have your attention, please? We'll be starting up shortly. Good evening, and welcome to the November 2nd, 2009 Lowell Planning Board meeting. Tonight we have two matters on our agenda. One is a public hearing, which was continued from our last meeting, which is a proposed zoning amendment, which is dormitory definition and special regulations. And another matter that we have is on the new business that actually we've addressed before, which is on 530 Stephen Street, which is Lowell Catholic High School, and is to amend an application for the parking gate at the rear in the parking lot. Can I just ask, how many people here do we have for the zoning amendment? Okay, and who do we have here from Lowell Catholic? Okay, if there's no objections, the board members, why don't we take the Lowell Catholic one first? I think that one might be quicker in time if there's no objections. Okay, so why don't we move on? We'll take the Lowell Catholic one. So this is the planning board review request to amend the approved site plan condition to allow the applicant to open the rear parking gate adjacent to the parking lot from 7:25 to 7:45 a.m., thereby allowing vehicular traffic to exit onto Wilder Street on a temporary basis. After reviewing the request, the board will decide whether the request is a minor change or material and subsequent change to the approved plan, in which case a public hearing will be required. At this point in time, will we hear from the applicant from Lowell Catholic, if we could, please?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I could just interject, since my wife is an employee at Lowell Catholic High School, I'll need to recuse myself from this discussion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can we hear from the applicant, please, from Lowell Catholic? Yeah, if you come to the microphone, please, just make sure that's on. Just introduce yourself, sir, and give us what your request would be, if you would, please. Thank you.
My name is Gary Hart, and I'm a dean of students at Lowell Catholic. And I've been in charge of, obviously, the students and parking and all the different areas as an assistant principal. What I've noticed is that I know the history of having the back gates open. I've been in touch with neighbors. When I first came on board during the summer, I went around and met the neighbors, put a card in each box. I know probably half the neighbors now, staying in touch with them because our kids park on that Galligan on the side there. And there are a couple of hydrants the teachers, the neighbors watch, and there are other things. So by throwing myself right into the parking, I realized the history, but I also realized where we've come. Well, we first had, right now we have the gates open in the afternoon, which is helpful. But what I've noticed is with the traffic of the construction on Stephen Street all during the summer, and myself, kind of like a proactive guy, getting ready for the fall and getting ready for the winter and seeing the cars that are coming in, I thought it would be wise to, see if this is possible, just to have it, to experiment or test having the back gates open for 15, 20 minutes in the morning. It almost seems we have more cars at that time in the morning coming through. And what I've learned, and I'd like to express to the board simply, is it's not so much, in my view, the cars coming in, if you're familiar with it, the school's in the middle, and the one-way traffic goes right around the school. Well, in the morning, we don't have use of the back gate. And when the cars come in, they stop at the stop sign, they drop off in the back. But what I've found is when they exit on the far side, that's when our students are moving from the main building over to their lockers in the science wing, the new McNamara building. And that area right there, I try to position myself every morning because I see the number of cars, I see the number of students. And if some of those cars were going out our back gate, one-way exit, just to relieve that, I think it would be the main thing for me would be the safety of the students. The people, I have to admit, that the people that make it, the drivers out front, I've seen it time and again that they'll stop and they'll wave the Lowell Catholic parent out, get into traffic. But if we were to relieve some of those, and I think I did a measurement, 135 cars just as an average coming through just in that 15-minute period. A lot of teachers come in before, a lot of students come in before, some come in after, getting close to being tardy. But that's the brunt of those cars coming in. And I pointed out, a lot of them are SUVs. So they're taking up space, they come around the building, and if possible, we could accept the cars coming in off Stephen Street and going around the back. But if they were allowed that 15 minutes to go out the back, I think it would it'd be a safety situation, relieve that situation, but it would possibly get the cars at other angles going out. Another thing is some of our students live in the area, obviously, and they could walk in the back. We do not have a gate, a walker's gate. It's completely fenced off back there except for the driveway gate. So that would be helpful to us if the parking gate, the back gates could be open 15, 20 minutes, and we'd be glad to experiment with it. But once again, the school has grown since that it was agreed upon having the back gate open in the afternoon, which is helpful, and we stay in touch with the neighbors. They let us know if it's open too long, and they've been good to work with, tell you the truth, because I'm new at it. And like I said, I've gotten to know a couple of them. But if we were to have it in the morning, with St. Margaret's next door, with Washington Street School out back, it just seems like our older kids are in there earlier. The parents would drop off, go right out the back, and I think it would be a good move.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else from Lowell Catholic here with you wanting to speak tonight? No? Okay. Anybody else who's present here this evening want to speak on this issue? Okay. Aaron, does Planning Development have any comments? I saw that you did send some of them to us, and you did have a couple of comments. I don't know if you want to address those, or we have them in writing, or anything else you want to add to that?
What I sent to the board were the old memos and the survey that was conducted by James Erickson and Jeff Gomes, the traffic engineer at the time, to just kind of take a survey similar, actually, to what Gary's already done, but position themselves at the front gate, also at the back gate on, I think it's Wilder, and then in one other location to get a sense of not just the count, but where they're going, the turning movements. And they did a before and after. So my general comment was that we could duplicate that kind of a survey if the board wishes to get a sense of the morning traffic to and the dropping off and then leaving.
Okay.
So something we probably could recreate.
Yeah, I do remember when James did that before, and I remember it was very helpful when he was on board with us. One of the questions I have, I don't know if I should address it to you, or address it to Mr. Hart, would be, I know they want to do it on a temporary basis. The question I imagine would be, what would be a temporary trial basis? Why don't I ask that to you, sir, if you come. I know before when we did it back in '06, if I remember correctly, we did it from October to December, and we did it on a temporary basis. And I remember, and I was speaking to some of my colleagues earlier this evening, I was surprised because when we did it, some of the people who were in opposition actually came back 2 months later and spoke and said the project was working. And
Okay, good.
And I said to the gentleman, I'm very happy to see you, because usually people don't come back and speak in favor of something after they've sat through listening to us once. They don't come back voluntarily, sit to listen to us again, especially if they feel something was in favor. So I guess my question would be, if you're looking on a temporary basis, but I don't know, problem if Division of Planning and Development wants to go up there and check it out again like we had in the past, what would be your request of a temporary basis, do you think? And I know you're concerned with the construction on Stevens Street and the bad weather coming in, so I don't know how long a period you might request in that temporary basis.
I think get through January.
Okay.
I think, November, into November.
Right, so
November through
approximately another
January.
2 months like we did last time then, you think? Last time we gave you a 2-month period, so maybe a 2-month period would be sufficient time to,
Very agreeable, sure.
okay?
Appreciate it. The other thing, the numbers I didn't mention would be, we moved from 250, 240 students, we're up to 369 right now. So that's how many, more students we have than we had when that was first, a couple of years before the gate was set up that way.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Any of the board members have any questions, concerns, comments?
Mr.
Jerry?
Chairman, if I may, just so I understand what we're doing here, the understanding would be that we would do this on a temporary basis for 2 months. Planning and Development would monitor how this works. Is that correct, Aaron? Just to make sure.
Yeah, I mean, the way that it was done last time is there was a count taken before the change, and then the gates opened. Maybe give it I don't know, I think they gave it a week or two, but give it some time for people to realize that the gate's open, and then take another count or another survey so we could see the adjustment, how that reacts, and then at the time, after the second count, is we can come back with an analysis.
And then we would come back, and then would we be looking at, because what we're being asked to determine here this evening is whether this is a significant change requiring posting, assuming public hearing. So it would then come back to us based on the analysis, and then we would make that determination. And of course, obviously, at that point, the neighbors would be aware of it. I don't know if the school would be willing to even through the temporary trial period is to provide some sort of notification to the neighbors. I mean, I was present at the meeting when that was approved, and I was not on the board at the time, and I was there for other projects, and And I know what it's like dealing with institutions, and neighbors do make concessions, and then, which seems to work, but it's the, the institution comes back and says, well, we're growing, we're successful, and oh, by the way, all the things that we had in place, we really would like to strip them back because it's better for us as an institution. Now, it may work well with the neighborhood, and it may be just fine. My concern is, you have a lot of residents come before the board, conditions are placed, they leave feeling good about the conditions, and then all of a sudden, they're not aware of the fact that the petitioner came back, asked for some changes, and then, what people thought were safeguards are no longer there. So I guess what I'm concerned about is to make sure the residents have notification, understand the process, understand that this is a trial period, and if it doesn't work out, that they'll have it, they should be coming back here and voicing some concern. It's typical to a traffic ordinance. It's a temporary traffic ordinance, and I've experienced this in the past, where residents didn't realize it was temporary, and they did have a chance to come back. It would be a public hearing before it would become final. In some instances, things just passed through, and people didn't realize they had an opportunity to speak. So that's my biggest concern. Obviously, if it works well for everybody, I think, obviously it's the overused phrase, but it's a win-win situation. But that would be my concern, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fischett. Mr. Claremont?
Yeah, and I agree with Mr. Frechette. The last time we went through this process, I think we did have a few people speak concerned about what would happen with the gate open. It seemed to work out. We had that trial period of 60 days. After that, they came back. We felt there was a minor modification, and the opening of the gate in the afternoon was approved at that point. But as Jerry said, whoever was here at that time has an expectation that the gate is going to be closed in the morning time, and to change that without notice to them is a little difficult. If we had to go through a whole public hearing, it would be more of a burden, I think, on the applicant. And I would just think if we did it on an experimental basis, say 60 days into January, and then you took your abutters list and just sent out a letter indicating that, this is what's going on an experimental basis, and there'll be, a hearing sometime in January or so that they could come in and voice whatever concerns they may have, or approvals they may have. So I think that'd be probably a good way to handle it. The difficulty may be is we haven't yet scheduled January meetings at this point, so we would have to, not have a date certain at this point. We'd have to get back in touch with the applicant and tell them what our January date would be before he can send out the letters to advise the abutters when they should be coming in. But I certainly would be in favor of that.
Okay. Yeah, back up the microphone if you would, please, sir. When we talk from that, but doesn't pick it up at home for the audience. And, go ahead, please, sir.
Just a quick comment is once again, we're looking at the back gate as an exit. It's not a two-way, and that, I think, would be more interesting to the neighbors. They're not going to have a traffic jam back there. People are going to take a left or take a right, and they're out of the neighborhood. And I think that's the sensitivity we're trying to show. We're trying to restrain ourselves and trying to provide safety without taking advantage of the situation and having another entrance and exit. We just want an exit in the morning. People will still come in the front door. People will still come in the front driveway. Okay, but I think it would help us an awful lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Claremont?
No, I think that's fine. And again, it's just an opportunity for the neighbors to be aware of what's going on and have an opportunity to speak about that if they should so desire.
Thank you. Well, usually with the first and the third Monday.
The third Monday would be a holiday, so
Right.
your most likely possibility, you usually move that Monday to a Thursday.
Correct.
So based upon that, your third Monday meeting would probably end up on Thursday, the 22nd of January, if that was consistent with what you typically do. That would allow the applicant to, if he orders a 300-foot abutters list, and rather than sending like a typical meeting notice, sends just a form letter that says, we're trying this from now until January 22nd, and we'd like your feedback at the planning board meeting. We'd like to do this permanently. That would let him start it. I guess my concern is if he opens the gate before the letter's sent, there's going to be challenges there, I think. So it helps to do that as soon as possible if he needs that time frame to start. And there's a big school vacation in the middle of that time frame, I'm sure, as well. So it doesn't give you a lot of testing time period if you have to wait a couple weeks to pull all that together and wait for our, you probably will set that whole schedule at your next meeting, I would assume. Typically, we used to do the late November meeting to schedule next year.
We would also want to schedule, make sure we coordinate with the applicant to do the before account instead of just opening it up, so there'd be a good idea to make sure we have a specific day and after the letter's been sent so that people know when they propose to start.
So it would make sense to us that maybe we could pick a starting date time and then run it 2 months from then?
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, I guess my next question would be, how much more time would they need to get things in order before we get the notices out and start?
It usually takes, the 10 days, or the assessor's office likes to have 10 days for an abutters list to be ordered. But other than that, it's just a matter of drafting up a notice or a letter to the neighbors and then coordinating with our department, which, could give us a week or so, 10 days. I think the 10 days to get the abutters notice ordered would be enough time.
If I suggested then that the experimental period could begin November 23rd, that's a Monday, and our public hearing in January, if it's going to be on a Thursday, would be the 21st, I believe. That's a Thursday. Thursday, 21.
Okay. 121?
So I guess would probably look for a motion to have the applicant send out a notification to all of the abutters, get a new abutters list, send out a notification that they're going to be opening that gate in the morning, beginning November 23rd on an experimental trial basis until January 21. On that date, there will be a hearing, and that they'll all be invited to attend that hearing on January 21.
Would you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
I'll second that, Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
motion made and seconded. Chair votes yes. So we'll try to do that for a trial period from November 23rd till January 21st. I did see one of the other comments that you had, that I know some of the traffic was backing up from the four-way stop sign by St. Margaret's. That's supposed to be going into a light situation in the future. Is it a light now? Yeah. Because that was the condition that we imposed on Lowe's, that they put the light there instead of the stop sign, which actually Lowe's suggested they would do it, so I didn't know if it was put into effect as of yet. The light is running now? Yeah. Yeah, 'cause I haven't been up there for a while, but I know that was one of the conditions that they ordered to put in, and they requested it, and the city traffic engineer said that would help with the traffic flow on Stevens Street, so, all right. Okay, does it? Yeah. All right. All right, so we'll put that into trial period, and we'll be back here on January 21st. Good luck. Hopefully it works out well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving along, we'll go back to a continuation of our proposed zoning amendment, dormitory definition and special regulation. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 48, Section 5, the Lowell Planning Board will hold a public hearing to hear all interested persons relative to an ordinance to amend the Code of Ordinances, City of Lowell, Massachusetts, with respect to Chapter 290, therefore entitled zoning. The amendment will replace the existing definition for the term dormitory and further add special regulations. We were here at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. We opened this matter up, and it was continued to tonight's night for further discussion on the public hearing. It was referred to the city council, who was meeting the next night, and I've been informed that they continued their public hearing over to November 17th? November 17th. So the matter will be on the agenda for November 17th at the city council meeting, and at this point in time, I'll turn the public hearing over back to the applicant on behalf of the city.
At this point in time, I will, I can give the board some options on how they want to go forward from here, and you can decide what you want to do. You still have an open public hearing at this point in time. To take a moment to review where we are and where we have come, we proposed an ordinance that would change the definition of dormitories. The strategy behind it was to implement some conditions based upon the concerns, some suggestions in the master plan to be able to allow private entities to build student housing specifically for college and university students in proximity to, but not on, the campuses, particularly of UMass Lowell, but it would also apply for community college students and other university students as it could work. But really, it's designed to support the university. It's designed most particularly to focus significantly on the institutional zoning district, which was put close to the university campuses. A proposal was put forward. The idea had been stirring around our office. The recommendation came that we put forward a proposal. We put forward a proposal to do that. We had a brief meeting with the zoning subcommittee at the city council to explain what it was. We arrived here at our last public hearing, and there was some significant public comment echoed by the board about some significant concerns with the way the ordinance itself was written and whether or not it achieved, I will say, a whole bunch of goals beyond those that were initially in the master plan that were the goals that we were trying to address. Essentially, this is often the way that zoning public hearings work in many communities, where there's a planning board recommendation to a city council vote, which is standard, and the city councils really rely on the planning board to participate in a lot of the nuts and bolts decision making on how some of this stuff should work. So there is a real opportunity here to kind of dig a little bit deeper into this ordinance and try to figure out what we can do to address those concerns. So the council, at the time of the last meeting, hearing that the planning board wanted to go forward with pursuing some changes and understand that the planning board continued their decision-making factor, they did very briefly open the opportunity for testimony, but then moved on to continue it until the 17th of November to see if that would give the planning board enough time to give them further direction on where they want to go from there. I looked back into the statutory standards because I was a little concerned about that last time. There really are none to be of significant concern. There's a 65-day time frame in which a planning board must open a public hearing on something referred to it, which has been done. There is a 90-day time frame after a council closes a hearing that they have to make a decision. Although I do believe that, being that we may have changes on the members of the city council after December 31st, that may anything held beyond that date may impact the circumstance of the public hearing, being that it was opened with a particular 9 people on the council. But that nonetheless gives us until November 17th to do some initial decision-making, and there's some flexibility in there. The one other concern statutorily that came up was the question about having a joint meeting with the zoning subcommittee, and I was very quickly reminded after the last planning board meeting that we can't do that while the boards have open public hearings. So it may be possible to do a joint deliberation process, I'm not quite sure, but typically the subcommittee discussion comes in before that public hearing process starts. So my recommendation was that we try through this process, at least to start this, to move this discussion forward, to try to address some of the concerns brought up in the public, to look at ways we can improve this, and also just to sort of see what your comfort level is and where you would like to go in terms of addressing interactions with the council on this process going forward. Both of you still have open public hearings at this point. I have gone through, and what I've essentially done here, which when you open the deliberation part of this hearing process, I think we can spend some time on, is I tried to identify each of the concerns that came up in the discussion with the public last time, put together what an amendment to this would look like to address that concern. So it's not necessarily an endorsement of an amendment or a recommendation against an amendment. I don't think anything in particular here completely dilutes the overall goal of the ordinance, while at the same time I believe that each amendment attempts to address a concern that came up through the course of discussion. So at a time that's appropriate to the board, I'm happy to dig further into that process and pass these out.
When you pass those out, we'll take a look at those and whether you want to highlight them.
Sure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you each a copy on top of the current ordinance. So
Okay.
you can kind of compare these amendments. Yes. The other point that the deliberating folks made to me is that when entering the deliberation process, I think you're supposed to close the general portion of the public hearing, although you could still take public comment if you feel comfortable doing that at this point.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one comment, though, and just on what George had just said there? And again, how we got to this point. In order for us to close the public hearing so that we can deliberate, but then the public can't comment, we're in a situation where these are fairly major revisions, and now the public's been handed out the handed the same document we're just looking at for the first time. They're looking at it for the first time, trying to read it, and then expecting public comment is not really how I see the system working. It's posting the ordinance so people can comment on it. These are fairly major revisions, as I see it. So, just a comment, again, and for us to deliberate, and then asking the public to look at this, just hand it to them, just like we just received comments with some substance, and then go into deliberation. I think it kind of dilutes a little bit of the public hearing on this.
To address some of those concerns, it's sort of always been our customary process here that at the permission of the chair to sort of take the public's input after the closing of the official hearing process, to make sure that we're on the right track with those sort of things. And it's certainly, although these revisions make some changes to the process, to this, it appears not to rise to the level of necessarily requiring this particular process like this to start over. But I do understand one of the fundamental flaws of the public hearing process is it sets up a very sort of pros and cons sort of process, which is why in planning we do try to do our best to address some of the sort of theoretical planning goals behind what we're doing ahead of or outside of that very strict process. In this case, once we enter it, it becomes more complicated. In this case, we honestly missed some of the potential concerns that would come up here as we were putting the first draft of this together, which is why we got this far into the process by the time we're doing that. But again, to some extent, the process works in that there is feedback and there's reaction to that feedback and the opportunity for the planning board to do their best to address it. If the board is comfortable pursuing that, we can do that. If the board reaches the end of this process and comes to the conclusion that this should be started over, that's a recommendation that's still available to the board to make.
Mr. Chairman, I think we also have the option of concluding our discussion tonight and keeping the public hearing open, because we still have another meeting prior to the City Council public hearing. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I believe if they're meeting on the 17th, I think we meet on the 16th, 2 weeks from tonight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the nuance of the process way this is done is that my understanding, I'm not a process expert in the rules of order here, but that typically you would take the opinions for and against and then close that part of the hearing and then open up internal deliberations of the board going back to the public if you need to in that process. And yes, there is another meeting available to you on the 16th if you should so conclude that you don't want to make a decision but want to seek out more feedback or hear what more people have to say or get more perspective on this between now and the 17th. And honestly, if you're still not ready, you can still on now or the 16th recommend and ask the council for more time as well. All of those options are potentially available to you.
Right. I was just following on to the comments that Mr. Frechette made, in that we're just seeing this now for the first time. The public is just seeing it now for the first time. To reopen and close the public hearing tonight may not give any of us enough time to really digest what's in here and discuss it. So it may make some sense to continue the public hearing.
One option that I can do is I can explain this all to you and leave it at that, and you can absorb this information and decide what you want to do with it at that point, if that is helpful.
I think it's a good start, too. Why don't we let you explain it? Just by way of comment, usually I know I have no problems opening up to let people from the audience speak, whether public hearing is open and closed. Some people agree with me on that, some people disagree with me with that. I think the more input that we have, I think the better decision we can make as a body. So by any chance, if it's in the board members' minds, if I did close the public hearing and people who came in for our next meeting and we were discussing it, and if people are here, I would ask them to have any comments on this matter. And I would, if there was no objections from the board members, I would let them speak. So that would be my feeling if people had more input for us, because it's indicated, I think a lot of time when we open up dialogue or something this important, if we'd rather have input from the neighbors as well, instead of, like I said last time, I think sometimes we might miss something, and I think that was brought up whether we had the subcommittee meeting with the zoning, the neighbors have some input, the city council has the input, the planning board has the input, and a lot of times, everybody brings something to the table that other people oversee. And so I have no problem with, if we do close it, if someone came, if the board have no problem with me entertaining them, listen to their comments, I'd be willing to do that. So I have no problem with that, just so. But I think we'll let George start with what his major his major proposed amendments would be, if he wants to go along with those, and then I think that'd be a good starting point, and we can take it from there. So George, why don't you just go through with what your major changes were, and if you want to just, I know most of it came out of what we addressed last time, but if you want to comment on why you changed it, and any comment you want would be satisfactory. Thank you.
What I'm attempting to do here is reflect the feedback that came from the discussion last time, and hopefully I captured what I could capture in a potential amendment in these proposals, and I put them into 5 categories to address it. So the first category is the districts in which dormitories are allowed in general, and as you probably are aware, when we originally did the ordinance, we did not change this at all. We didn't touch it. It was allowed special permit in suburban mixed use, traditional mixed use, neighborhood business, downtown mixed use, and high-rise and urban mixed use, and allowed by right in the institutional district. Going back to some of the wording that Mr. Frechette pointed out in the master plan, it very clearly pointed out that the goal of the private dormitories was downtown, city center, and around the university, which sort of leads to the idea that urban mixed use, downtown mixed use, and institutional are where we're trying to encourage this activity. We had some internal debates in the office about traditional mixed use, which would open up the possibility for redevelopment along University Avenue in Pawtucketville, but we sort of leaned to the idea and put in this proposal that didn't exactly capture the way the direction of topic of conversation was going at the last meeting. So if you're trying to implement the direction of the topic of conversation in the last meeting, you have one of 2 ways to potentially address this. The first, which is up on top, would be essentially to just change the definition of dormitory and change it to not being allowed in suburban mixed use, traditional mixed use, and neighborhood business. Leave it as special permit in urban mixed use and downtown mixed use to allow that extra level of review of the zoning board and the ability for denial, and leave it allowed in the institutional district as was originally intended when we were trying to encourage this process through the 2004 zoning change. The only reason I proposed an alternative that would actually, the alternative that's on here sort of splits the private dormitories from the dormitories by sponsoring institutions, would be to make sure that we're not removing a right that somebody has today. But when you actually read through who the sponsoring institutions are, most of them are exempt from zoning anyway. So I could not think of a likely case whereby making it no in like traditional mixed use would cause, for example, some convent to be limited in their ability to expand, because despite the fact that we list them in zoning as something in the definition, convents probably are going to argue they're a religious use anyway, and they're exempt from our zoning as it is. So it really tried to hone this down to just, I think that the top amendment actually very clearly spells out the intent of the concern that was addressed by the public, and certainly the board of the public can, as you go forward on this, comment on whether or not you think that does do that. But that would basically altogether, and to stress, Lowell does not allow use variances. There is not a process by which an applicant can go to the zoning board of appeals and ask for a variance from use. So if it's not allowed, the only way that they would have to approve a project would be to go back to the council and change the zoning. So when we say not allowed in suburban mixed use, there is not an appeal process available to them without a zoning change at that point to start this process. So that really closes that option and limits it to those 3 zoning districts. more consistent with the master plan goals.
So I just want to make a comment on that. I honestly was, it was education to me to learn last meeting that we actually, in our current zoning, allow dormitories by special permit in an SMU district, in a TMU district, in neighborhood business district. So I initially thought that your proposal was changing that to allow that. So, that was new information to me. And I like your first alternative to Amendment 1A, where we eliminate those, because I think that, I think for all the reasons we discussed at the last meeting, the SMU zones, the TMU zones, the neighborhood business district zones are probably not places we want to encourage the construction of dormitories for the most part. So I think your first alternative, where we allow, whether it's private or institutional development, allow by special permit the dormitory construction in urban mixed use and downtown mixed use, and by right in the institutional zone is the right way to go. So I think we have an opportunity here to not only include this amendment in some form that you're trying to do to allow private development, but also clean up our existing zoning so that we don't inadvertently allow unwanted uses, even if it's by special permit, in those other zones.
And that can move that forward. So issue number 2 on the next page actually addresses another remainder of the old ordinance. As you may recall, we had a definition of dormitory that we deleted and replaced. But when we did that, we left the first sentence from the original definition. A building used as group living quarters for individuals enrolled or employed by a university, college, boarding school, convent, or similar institutional use. There were a couple of issues that came up with that, one of which was the term similar institutional use. After having significant discussions about trying to define that, both first here in this meeting and second back in the office after this meeting, nobody could think of what that could be that we needed to protect through this ordinance. And the type of things that we may or may not want that could be a similar institutional use, in many cases, are exempt from zoning and out of our control anyway. And if this potentially opens up the ability to do something else, it's just opening up a potential risk that is probably not worth working with. So the simple solution is to include in this amendment the removal of the words similar institutional use. So that's Amendment 2A. It just changes university, college, boarding school, convent, or similar institutional use. Just say university, college, boarding school, or convent, period. Now, the follow-up question, which is in 2B, does relate to our new wording. We then proceeded to talk about dormitories as being run by separate private for-profit entities. And then the immediate reaction that some questions were asked about was, well, if we're trying to encourage college and university students to live off campus, why are we including the boarding schools and convents, even though, I don't know the likelihood that someone would build a private housing for a boarding school, but the question exists as a possibility. So 2B cleans that up and basically just says if it's a private entity operating it, it's for college or university students. One of the things I didn't touch in here is we talked about the and or employed by a university. I left that in the original ordinance to allow nonprofits or entities other than the for-profits to be able to do that, because there are, although I don't know of a program at UMass Lowell, and they probably would be exempt if they did, there are programs sometimes where they have faculty and residents in student dorms, so the possibility to allow something like that, which is currently allowed today, we could take that out as well, but it didn't seem as much to achieve an important goal of doing something, and it ran the risk of potentially causing some issues. The other issue with the word employed is when you actually apply it to the convent. The nuns typically in a convent may be more employed than enrolled in that particular wording, and that may be offer the possibility that is why that essentially is meant to work there. In the case of the boarding school, you probably do have employees along with students in that mix to some extent. I may also need to tweak this a little bit more to make sure that the residence hall director type people who aren't necessarily students are clearly allowed to live in these places, because that is the intention in the performance standards. But that's essentially what 2B is trying to do. It's trying to really hone this down to being the idea that that the for-profit program is a university program alone. If it's okay, I can move on to number 3. Issue number 3 is regarding the conditions. Now, the original strategy was that we were developing a series of performance standards. And there was some discussion in the meeting about the clarity of the performance standards. And one of the things that was a concern to me was if we got too detailed in the performance standards, it might make it becomes a very difficult thing to write in a theoretical standing. Yet at the same time, there needs to be some minimums to establish some basic understanding of what they're going to present, and typically we would rely on a review process to be able to ensure that those standards are met to a comfort level of the community. My comment back to you at that point was, well, site plan review will cover that. Well, I wanted to be absolutely sure we were more clear about that for starters. So the proposal in 3A changes the sentence at the top of the standards, which said dormitories developed and operated by private for-profit organizations must provide services including but not limited to the following, and then it lists those standards to doing two things. First, it says dormitories developed and or operated by private for-profit organizations must provide the following minimum performance standards. Such standards shall be reviewed and approved by the planning board as a part of a public hearing for a site plan review and shall at a minimum include the following. Puts it in a position where the applicant must bring the way that they are developing these conditions to the board as a part of their site plan review application to ensure that they meet them. That was implied before, but not specifically spelled out. And I think it's somewhat repetitive to specifically spell it out, but at the same time, I think if it builds up that comfort level, it helps. And then I also this is also repetitive and honestly, to some extent, not necessary because the minimum thresholds already require it. But by adding at the bottom what I added to 11.4.2, which is the list of projects that trigger site plan review, by specifically adding that anyone who builds a privately developed dormitory subject to this section is subject to site plan review, even though you're already going to hit a lot of the other thresholds anyway, makes it absolutely 100% clear to anybody looking at this that they are going to have to come to the planning board for site plan review, and they are going to have to address how they meet those concerns through that process. There were two other minor questions that came up related to those conditions. One was the definition of 24-hour on-site security, which we meant to mean that there would be a person there 24 hours a day, so we attempted to change that wording to clarify that. And the other was where it came to the discussion about the distance that students must walk to a campus academic building. Someone asked what the definition is of a campus academic building. So what 3C does is it adds a definition of that, that it is, first of all, primarily used for teaching classes or research, that it is adjacent to other such academic buildings, and it does not include student housing. So it can't really be a core of dormitories to be a campus academic building. It can't be, like we talked about the theory of the boathouse, it can't be a building that's sort of out in the abyss somewhere. It actually has to be on a campus to be a campus academic building, and it actually has to be used for academic purposes. So that attempts to clarify that. Beyond that, some of these conditions are still things that need levels of clarity, and my hope is that the planning board would feel comfortable that the site plan review process would help to address those. If there are other concerns the board has in the wording of this that you'd like specific language tightened up, we can certainly review that.
If I could just hit you
Yes.
on one, I do like the fact that you did put in for the site plan review on Amendment 3A. So, I mean, whether it's there or not, at least I think it's clearer to spell it out directly, have
Yep.
somebody consider it. And also, as I understand it, so we would have the site plan review, but it still would require the special permit in the zones that we allow. They have to go before the zoning board of appeals.
Yes,
So we
and
have
down-
site plan here.
Yes.
And usually I know whenever we do the site plan, that whatever conditions we put on site plan has to be incorporated by the special permit when it goes to zoning board of appeals.
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's a big one, because I think on the site plan, I think the major thing I think would jump out at something like this would be the traffic concern.
Yes.
And that way would have input by the city traffic engineer if you're having someone, as you have this distance going from point A to point B to the school, and what traffic concerns, and whether it's a shuttle or not, or what type of ways of transportation, because I think we had that in here, and I think you might be getting to that part, about the transportation to and from a certain area, so at least we could pick up on that traffic concern. So I do like the fact that you added that in myself, so we'd have the site plan review as well as the ZBA, because I think that transportation back and forth would be a big issue, I think. for
Right, and the
university.
transportation demand management plan is really a concept that traffic engineers know what they are, how to do them, and the goal is to address alternatives to driving to and from a particular site. So asking for that type of a plan out of an applicant that can then be reviewed by a traffic engineer with comments back to you at a site plan review provides some level of protection. There is a pretty significant parking requirement in the ordinance for dormitories, but at the same time, our hope is that even though students may bring cars, we don't want them driving all over, driving to campus and back every day when we can provide alternatives. Hopefully, one of two things will happen. I mean, particularly with the ones in the institutional district, they'll be really close to campus, so they don't need to do anything but walk. But if the decision is made to place one further away from campus, a transportation process is set up. Even the one the university's running, like up at in a conference center at the Doubletree, addressing how you get from there to campus, to the rest of campus and back is an important piece of this. And although a university project won't be subject to our review, if something's done privately, it is, and we can make sure that it's done to the same level of thought that a university-type program would be.
Thank you. I appreciate your input on that matter. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
We're okay, we can move on to amendment number 4. Four is, a topic of discussion that I'm interested in some feedback on at some point in time, because I don't necessarily see the need to do this, but the question came up about establishing a minimum size to ensure people aren't trying to turn their 3-family houses into dormitories. I think that a lot of the rest of what we have done, especially establishing a site plan review with a transportation demand management program, is probably going to discourage people from turning their 3-family houses into dormitories. It is a significant expense. I mean, you require a 24-hour on-site security person, property management, live-in community assistant. I don't know a circumstance where it would be financially feasible to do this with a building of less than 50 students. So I did propose that if it makes the board more comfortable, we could actually adjust the actual definition of the private for-profit dormitory to have a minimum of 50 students to ensure that these are sort of a conglomeration of something of a reasonable size rather than sort of smattered throughout neighborhoods, albeit the types of buildings we're looking at not likely to send you in that sort of a direction. And then issue number 5 did not come up at the meeting. It's something that came up in our office afterwards, and 5A and 5B just clarify this. It would ensure that the definition, where a lot of ours said privately developed and operated, and we realize that things that are privately developed and then publicly operated, or publicly developed and then privately operated, might actually be slipping through the cracks. So we changed all the ands to and or, so that if you do either or, it triggers the process. So it's just a level of additional protection to help cover that particular sort of a situation. So that was my best attempt to propose what might capture the set of concerns, and the hope is that if there's an interest on behalf of the board in moving forward with achieving that goal in the master plan, that it may make sense to package some set of those amendments into a recommendation to the council as a way to sort of move this process forward.
All right, thank you. Anybody here like to speak in favor of the proposed zoning amendments this evening? I know we had discussion last time, and some of the people who were present tonight did speak last time, so I'd take anybody want to speak in favor as what we proposed last time, as well as what has been amended this evening. Any comments either way? Anyone want to speak in favor of the proposed amendment? If you do, sir, you want to speak in favor? Okay, in favor? Yes.
Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Oman, 58 Oakland Street, Lowell, Mass. As I listened to George and looked over the presentation as he was giving it, I concur with with what he wants to do regarding issues 2, 3, 4, and 5, because it makes sense in the law. So I just were on those particular issues. On issue 1, along the districts, I seem to favor the alternative to Amendment 1A, and I think that keeps the it makes sense, the special permits. And so I urge that the board look at it carefully, and if there is some tweaking to be done, I will, I think the board will know what needs to be tweaked. But I happen to be in favor of this and urge that the board consider approving it as an amendment and as proposed by the DPD. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak in favor of the zoning change? In favor? In favor? Hearing none, that portion of the public hearing is closed. Anyone like to speak in opposition of the proposed zoning change? You just come to the microphone and state your name and address, please, sir, for the record.
My name is John Hamblett. I live at 495 Varnum Avenue. I am on the executive board of the Pawtuckettville Citizens Council, and I'm chairman of the Zoning and Planning Subcommittee of the Pawtuckettville Citizens Council. We reacted strongly 2 weeks ago. We in Pawtuckettville live in the shadow of 2 large towers. We see them every day as we go to work and as we come home. Those towers are there because we didn't think change could happen that quickly in Lowell, and because somebody decided that it'd be okay to put in 11 zoning exceptions for that building. So when we hear a zoning change that we know nothing about is being put before this board so that it can be voted on in tomorrow's city council meeting, alarms go off. We would request, even on an informal basis, that as a matter of policy, significant change should be allowed to steep a little. As Mr. Frechette pointed out, handing us a piece of paper and expecting us to comment intelligently on it 10 minutes later probably won't happen and really isn't acceptable. We're not opposed to this. We'd just like the opportunity to discuss it a little bit more with DPD and with ourselves. So with that, we respectfully request that the hearing be left open.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else like to speak in opposition? Anyone else in opposition? In opposition? Hearing no one further opposition, that portion of the public hearing is closed. At this point in time, I'll turn over any questions or concerns any of the board members.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Fischette, if you would, please.
Again, I
Excuse me.
I appreciate the attempt to address a lot of the issues that came up at the last meeting, and I think there's some very positive responses to that. However, I really believe that for myself personally, I want some time to take a look at this once again for the public to really digest it as well. And as we discussed at the last meeting at great length, is and as we've done in the past, typically, is we would have an opportunity to have some free-flowing discussion before the amendment is drafted and then put out for a public hearing. And then occasionally, issues come up at the public hearing that enhance the draft version. However, I really think that the issues that came up at our last meeting were significant enough, and the changes to address that are significant enough that I think it does require some additional time to really deliberate over this. The unfortunate situation, I believe, is that more parliamentary than anything else is what we were really looking forward to was even some input from the zoning subcommittee with reference to this, and unfortunately, as we discovered by leaving the public hearing open, we couldn't have any substantial discussion with the zoning subcommittee. If we leave the public hearing open now, it will give us some time to digest this. However, as I understand it, we will not be able to have any discussion with the zoning subcommittee unless they wanted to come to the public hearing and speak. And perhaps, we've covered the issues, and I don't know if they certainly have anything more to add, but I certainly would, at the very least, I would want the subcommittee and the council to understand what it is they're voting on. And so I guess I'm a little bit at a loss as to what our best move is. I'm not prepared to vote on this evening. I can tell you that. I mean, it was just handed to us this evening, and I certainly want to look at it and look at the comments and concerns that I had and that other people had brought up, and then and to make the proper choice as to what is the correct amendments to adopt. Having said that, I want to hear from my colleagues as to whether we want to keep the public hearing open. I certainly want to hear from the public. I appreciate the chairman's comments to allow the public to speak, even if we do close the public hearing. The only benefit of closing the public hearing is if we are going to have some dialogue with the zoning subcommittee. If we're not going to have dialogue with the zoning subcommittee, we might as well keep the public hearing open, and then allow the public to look at this. We'll look at this, comment on it, make a decision on the 16th, I believe, and then it goes to the city council on the 17th. And again, that would be if closing the public hearing tonight is not going to result in any dialogue with the zoning subcommittee, it's pointless to do that. So again, I wait to hear what my colleagues have to say, but I think my tendency at this point is to keep the public hearing open, and then we can take a vote on this on the 16th. Thank you,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Fischett. Mr. Genman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of comments. First of all, George, I think you and the planning department have done a pretty good job of addressing most of the issues that were raised at the last meeting. I think the changes you suggest give us some alternatives that allay some of the fears that I know I had and my colleagues had as well. That said, I would concur with my colleague, Mr. Fischett, that we probably want to take some time to really give this this is an important piece of legislation, and I think we want to take some time to look at it carefully and give the neighborhood the equal time to think about it and see what we've actually proposed here before we take the step to vote on it. Whether that means keeping the public hearing open or closing it is a matter of, that's a different issue. But that said, a couple of things I want to bring out. I just wanted to make sure that the neighbors who are here understand one thing that I touched on earlier that we can do with this ordinance change, and that is that right now, in the zoning code we have today, the institution, UMass Lowell, for instance, has the right to construct dormitories via special permit in the SMU zone and the TMU zone. And that would be all the way up University Ave and along the boulevard out where the boathouse is and the Saab building. I think with this, we have the opportunity here to restrict that, and I would support that. I think that's the appropriate thing to do, is to restrict the development, whether it's by the institution or by private institution, only to the institutional zone in the UMU and DMU zone. I think that makes a lot more sense. So that's one thing that we have the opportunity to do here that we wouldn't have had otherwise. I did want to ask you a question, George, with regard to dimensional requirements. I wondered if it made sense to put any kind of, or if it was even possible, to put some kind of dimensional requirements into the ordinance. And the reason I ask that is, you know, how many students, residents, can be in a dwelling unit? Right now, in the UMU code, the land area per dwelling unit is 1,000 square feet. Right? So we have to have 1,000 square feet of land area for every dwelling unit. And that's typically, you know, a 1, 2, 3 bedroom apartment or condo. But what's a dwelling unit in a dormitory, and how many students can live in a dwelling unit?
Well, to address that, the dwelling unit standard really doesn't apply to the dormitory definition because the rooms are very different and the setup's very different. Typically, a dwelling unit is an apartment, you know, typical apartment building, and there are no more than 3 unrelated family members that can live in a dwelling unit. And that's then based upon the definition of family, and then single family unit is a single family and a single family dwelling unit, and that sort of all leads down to that. The dormitory definition is much more flexible because student dorms run from anything from being sort of single bedroom, sort of, you know, single bedrooms on hallways that a student lives in with sort of a shared bathroom setup, to a lot of these sort of typical student setups now where there's like a shared kitchen where there can be 9 or 10 single bedrooms on a kitchen, so there can be all sorts of flexibility to that. So because these entities that do the private types of student housing do a whole variety of different types of housing with a whole variety of different types of amenities, I'm reluctant to start defining that to a level that I'm going to limit their ability to meet the demand of what the student today needs, because I'm not really quite sure what that is. If there is a fundamental concern about number of students as a whole, one potential way to address that, and we can go back and look at it, is to literally address a student per lot area or something of that sort on the dormitories that actually sort of identifies the actual density of students on that particular site, but at the same time leaves it up to the applicant to figure out how to actually design that project to get that density. I'm willing to take a look at that. I don't know what that would look like, but it's one potential way to address it. Theoretically, though, the actual limitation on the number of students in a dormitory project is essentially in our parking requirements. I mean, because of the expense of building parking and the ways that you can potentially build parking, because of the requirement that there be a space per 2 beds, and because of how much space a parking space takes up, it really, before the unit numbers drive it, the parking space numbers end up driving the maximum size of what you can potentially do on a site. But I'm happy to go back and take a look at kind of what that would be and quantify that if it's more comfortable sort of having a number there that addresses that. I also want to address your previous comment. While it is accurate that our ordinance with the correction would establish the limitations that the existing ordinance does not on where dormitories go, one of the remaining challenges we have in doing that, it certainly sends a message of what our master plan sends in terms of where we do and do not want student housing from the university, but as the university is a state entity, they're still exempt from our zoning altogether. So while we can send the message through this that we don't want them in the suburban mixed use and the traditional mixed use in the neighborhood business zone, the zoning still isn't necessarily a means to completely achieve that goal. So it's worthwhile to have it. I still think it's valuable if we ever got in the circumstance where the state for some reason decided to give local zoning control to a state university. By having this, we're in a position where we have that information together. If anyone ever came to town with a private college of some sort, we're in a position where we have already guided them as to where it's appropriate and where it's not to do that. This would provide better guidance than what we have today, because this where it says it today, it says, oh, go build a college up on Pawtucket Boulevard. This would more clearly establish that that's not what we want to happen, but certainly, there is that challenge of the university's exemption that can sometimes drive these things out of the city's control.
I see.
Right.
Thanks for that clarification. Sure. So I can envision, with regard to your parking, the parking will take care of it issue. I can envision private developers coming before us and say, oh, we don't really need that much parking because we're going to provide a bus to the school, and the students don't have cars, and we won't let them have cars and things like that. So I'm not sure that we can count on parking requirements, or it's on a street and there's not much parking. We did a survey that says there's open parking on the street, right? So I'm not sure we can rely on the parking requirements to ensure that we have adequate space. I could, with this definition, technically somebody could have, a relatively small lot, build a tower, and house all kinds of students in there and have absolutely no land area restrictions put upon them. So, is that not true?
We'll take a look at what numbers make the most sense to trigger what level of density on the different lots. I mean, we can get that information to you and see if it helps.
So I
inform
think
the
we need to
discussion.
take a look at it. In my opinion is we need to take a look at restricting. There's also a need, I think, in a dormitory setting, a need for some type of courtyard where kids can play Frisbee or something like that. Some type of space beyond just a city block.
Well, there are two potential examples I can take, and I can take a closer look at what their impacts would be. One is, the one that we theoretically talk about, although the landowner certainly has not been a part of the discussion, is the St. Joseph's Hospital site, which could potentially be a conversion into something like this if it was ever pursued. And the other is the more realistic, because it's been discussed option, is what that marginal street property is. And, that was pursued under sort of a strange middle ground where they were affiliated with the university initially because they had the guarantee of the connection with the university that fell apart with the appeal. And yet so they could go forward under the current ordinance, but at the same time they were private, so they required board review. And I should add that what this ordinance would do is it would not allow that sort of activity to happen in suburban mixed use or traditional mixed use or neighborhood business, where it is a private entity affiliated with the university, which could potentially happen today under the current ordinance. Still require our review, still come under our purview, but be potentially allowed under our current ordinance. I can look at what the densities would be on those two sort of theoretical projects, since they're ones we've kind of talked about in the past, and get a better idea of kind of how that would play out and what those sort of impact would be and what that sort of density would be and what that mix would be.
Okay, I would like to see some type of density requirement so that we're not too constrained, and that we maybe prohibit the construction of very large tower-like structures as dormitories on small pieces of land. And I still, even though you explained to me about the state exemption for state universities, I would still support the amendment that restricts dormitory use in the the SMU and the TMU zones. I think that's
And it
the
is a
best way to
good
go.
point that since we had that one on Marginal Street that was privately developed with the public university connection, it would not let you do that in one of those districts, which is something that is under our purview. It would require you to do something similar to what the applicant at Marginal Street did, which is move a site like that into the institutional district, have the council vote on doing something like that before pursuing a development of that sort.
Okay.
All right.
That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Genman. Mr. Claremont?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify again, as our zoning currently exists, a dormitory is allowed in SMU and TMU, NB, UMU, DMU, all by special permit, allowed as of right in the institutional zone. But under our current zoning requirements, none of these are being built because they're defined as being accessory use and would have to be on the same lot. Is that correct?
Not necessarily on the same lot, but it would have to have a direct affiliation with an entity that is an institution. So the essence is one of the fundamental reasons why they're not being built is because the institutions in Lowell are public institutions, whereby the process to get funding to do some of these things is very complicated and takes many years and very difficult, and the end result is a project that isn't taxable to the city. So we have had one attempt at having an entity where they were a private entity that we're going to affiliate with the university and build one with the Marginal Street project. The end result of that is that was deemed by the Attorney General's office not really to be an allowed model, although we saw that as a model which potentially allowed us to approve something private while keeping it within the confines of the ordinance. So we looked at the option that many, many other schools throughout the country have done, where they've had private entities privately develop student housing and what sort of protections need to go on them. And that's where we have essentially gotten to this. It's a strategy that was proposed in the master plan but was never allowed through the zoning because of the word. Essentially, the simple word accessory use in there implies that you have to have an accessory relationship with one of those institutional entities. And it's impossible to set up that sort of a relationship, so it just makes it impossible to do.
And by dropping that, then, with the new ordinance, dropping that requirement that it be accessory use is going to open up the opportunity for them to build in the zones, in the selected zones by way of a special permit. That's the biggest opportunity for them. Now, in looking at the modifications that you propose, I mean, the original zoning ordinance would allow construction in SMU, TMU, NB, UMU, DMU, still in the institutional as of right, but the amended document we were handed tonight, based upon our discussion at the last meeting, will eliminate SMU, TMU, and NB, just retaining UMU, DMU, and the institutional as of right.
Right,
Correct?
that's right.
Okay. A couple of things, just going through your amendments, and I think you did a good job trying to tighten up a lot of the things that we discussed. And I looked at some of this language myself, because sometimes it's a little, you know what you want to say, but sometimes it's difficult to putting it in a way that makes sense and is clear for everyone that's looking at it. But we have an amendment that says, for the purposes, your new amendment, for purposes of this section, a campus academic building shall be any building that is primarily used for teaching classes and/or research, is adjacent to other such academic buildings, and does not include student housing. And we were talking about last time whether the boathouse was, you know, something that's used for classes, and would that trigger, you know, a campus academic building. That language may have to be looked at, because a building that's adjacent to other academic buildings, you could have two academic buildings that are satellite buildings, and that would still fit in the definition. Perhaps something that defines it as being located on the contiguous academic campus, something like that. Might better define that.
All right, one other thing I can potentially do here is leave this step a little more open to the planning board as well, to make sure that if someone tries to play some games to get through that definition, that the board can sort of rein them back in and tell them they have to do this.
Right.
I'll reword that a little bit and try to get that back to you in your packet for next time.
Just in a general sense, I mean, we've discussed quite a few major changes, I think, to the proposed ordinance. And if we were going to be making those changes, they'd come through almost as a whole new document. And I don't know if they consider that as being sufficient to what's already been advertised as going forward on the ordinance. I'm not thoroughly comfortable with moving forward with what we have here. We have an ordinance, we have some proposed amendments, we're going to be making some additional amendments to that. Would really like the opportunity to meet with the zoning subcommittee. We won't have that opportunity because our public hearing is open, their public hearing is open. I think that there's just too many pieces to pull together, in my opinion, to get a comprehensive ordinance that makes sense and is not sort of rushed, you know, through from my perspective. And I understand that certainly you folks have been doing a lot of work on it and have put a lot of good thoughts together, but I'm not thoroughly comfortable that what we have is workable and makes a lot of sense without putting it together in a format that's going to totally change what's already been advertised as the ordinance. So I'm thinking that I'd probably be in favor of not recommending approval, starting the process over again, meeting with the zoning subcommittee, getting all the information properly before them and before us, and coming up with a document that we all can agree upon, and submit that to the city council. That'd be my thought.
Thank you, Mr. Clement. Just a couple of comments I have, and I'll try to take them in order as my fellow board members spoke. One, I'd have no problems either way to keeping the public hearing open for next date and time. If I agree with a lot of what Jerry said, basically to have a chance to digest a lot of the matters that came before us. Because basically we have the proposal, we have the current ordinance, and a lot of time, and I think as Jerry did last time, we took the ordinance, we tried to put it on the map, see where it fit, where it didn't fit, and go through the zoning again, and you think about something, you might forget it, go back to it. So I have no problem with continuing the public hearing if need be. I like the, a lot of the matters that Mr. Chairman brought up about, you know, building up to a certain height. The question would be, you know, can we put a height limit on that? What is the student ratio per dwelling unit? And what type of open space may be involved? If we could look at that, so there is some activity instead of just a building going straight up. So I think any comments on those would be definitely warranted by the planning and development to address that concern. I also agree with Mr. Claremont's concern is if by, I still like to see the zoning subcommittee meeting take place between us and the city council. So whether we make that as form of a motion tonight or a future date, or if we want to continue for the public hearing, digest this and have all the board members consider that, and then come back at the next meeting and see, once we had a chance to digest this all, whether we either vote in favor with amendments that we recommend, denial, and hopefully we get back before the council on that. I have no problems either way, as long as, but I think if we want to continue to the next public hearing, that way with more input, then we can see what other further comments you have. So I have no problems with going either way, but I think all the points that were brought up tonight by all the board members are definitely things that we have to look into, and I'm in agreement basically with everything that's been discussed so far. And I do agree that the new proposed amendments, I think George, you did a good job on it. I think it captured a lot of the concerns we had. I think the big thing that Jerry came right up with that I think that we all jumped right out on was that SMU, and I think that, and that was just at first sight looking at it. I understand what you're saying by bringing in what we can't allow by the government use, but I think if we can restrict up most of use that we have as a city, then let us control what we feel is use, and then what we have no control of, then let the government do what they can do, but at least it sends our signal what we want to do. I like the fact how you put it in, as I commented earlier, about the site plan, so at least we do have review of the matter, instead of it just coming in before the zoning board of appeals as a special permit, and then at least if we can address some of our site plan issues as well. So I do agree with that. I like the fact that you put that in, spelled it out nice and clearly. I think when it comes to a zoning issue like this, even if it's ambiguous, the more we spell it out, the clearer it is. I think it's easier for people who are reading it, so there's less chance of saying, well, what's the interpretation of that? I think that, you know, by spelling it out nice and clear, easy, and even if it's repetitive, I think it gets to the point that this is what would, you know, the plan is from the city to go forward. So moving back, whether we want to continue for a public hearing for another meeting, I have no problem with that. So I'll entertain whatever motion the board wants to at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, before we go into that, can I just have one more technical
Sure,
aspect of this
absolutely.
with George? George, on section 3D of the ordinance, where the buildings are located such that students may walk further than 2,000 linear feet from the nearest campus academic building of the institution, can we define, and maybe you can explain it to me, but if you can define, you know, we talked about marginal streets, a good example. What are you describing for linear feet? Should we further define that as along public ways? So in other words, linear feet, could it be from shortest distance is a straight line?
Across the river.
Right, exactly. But really should define it as public ways from, you know, the dormitory front door to the academic building front door. But I mean, it really should be clearly defined. Linear feet, it doesn't say where you're measuring that from and to.
Yeah,
So if we
I can
tighten that
clarify,
up,
but in addition to public ways, there may be, you know, reasonable private easements that cause people to be able to make shortcuts of some sort. So I will define a route that, you know, what it intends to define, and I can clarify it intends to define as a route that students can use to be able to get from one point to another that is legally accessible to them and essentially.
Right, but you understand, the way
appropriate
this is written, an attorney and an engineer will sit there and say it's 2,000 linear feet
for that. Yeah, well,
from,
Just some background on that, I know from working in the court system, when we have a project like that, when we have someone who's charged with distributing drugs in a school zone within 1,000 feet, they take it from the corner edge of the property, for example, what that school would be.
Sure.
And they take it directly as where the crow flies to the corner edge where the dealership is. That means, though, someone's stealing drugs, so it wouldn't be from the front door of the building. We had case in point where it came up with the Maury School, and the drugs were being distributed down in a couple square. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I went to school at the Maury now, where's that 1,000 feet? And they say, but the very corner of that, so it wasn't on with the building, it's the corner of the lot. And it was 996 feet or something, and the city engineer has to come in and put the map up to
Sure.
show where that meets within the 1,000 feet school
so
zone.
if we could,
yeah,
So the definition
I-
comes down to what they argue over the 1,000 feet.
There are areas in our zoning where we talked about distance to parking, where we actually defined in the ordinance front door to front of parking space, because we wanted that to be what we actually meant, rather than edge of project, so that it would be clear to people that we actually meant that, because you do get these lots where there might be a sliver that gets you out there, and then you can suddenly claim
well, again,
an
that didn't come out of any,
exemption some sort.
you know,
So-
out of
So,
the
yeah, I mean,
air, yeah.
that's a relatively easy one to tighten up. I
Okay.
mean, and, you know, to some extent, it's up to you how you want to take this. I mean, Joe, I asked around on the legal question, I didn't get a definitive answer, but I got a lot of comfort level that the level of amendments that we're doing doesn't necessarily require us to restart the process, but because the ad defined what we're doing in terms of changing definition and opening up special regulations, and that's still essentially what we're doing. But at the same time, if there's beyond the strict definition of that, if there's a comfort level that can't be reached on this, that is an option that's available to you to start the process over again with a clean amendment. I can, if you're sending me in a direction where you're saying you like all of these plus the things you talked about, I mean, if it's helpful, by the next meeting we can actually put that into a clean copy, and then you can either decide if you want to recommend approval, recommend changes to that copy, recommend approval and go to a zoning subcommittee, or recommend starting the process over with that copy if you believe that's the appropriate process to do. And really any of those options could still be available to you at that point.
Yeah, it's not that I'm uncomfortable with that. The thing I'm most uncomfortable with is the fact that we haven't had an opportunity to speak to the zoning subcommittee. I'd like to know where they're coming from, their thought process in putting this forward, our thought process in proposing some amendments to that, and I think that's a good give and take to be able to put the best ordinance together that you can. I'm not saying that any of this is not the way it should be. I'm just saying it would be helpful to me to have that give and take with the zoning subcommittee, to be able to know where they're coming from, how this thing came up to us to begin with, and the rationale behind some of these proposed amendments, rather than just making the changes, submitting it to the city council, and having them, not necessarily know where we're coming from. I think it's always a good process to be able to speak directly with them and hash out those ideas, unless there was some, rush to get this through. I'm not seeing it, frankly.
No, there isn't in particular. I mean, there's been discussions about the concept of this ongoing for a while. Marginal Street opened us up to some of the challenges. We get inquiries every now and then about doing this sort of stuff. We see it as a tax-based benefit to pursue, and it had been something that had been on our to-do list for quite a while. But it makes sense to do the process that makes the public and the council and the planning board comfortable that we are not trying to rush this in a way that would make people uncomfortable. So if that's what it's doing, then we'll have to do what we can to address that. One possibility is we can package this all up. We can come back and look at it in 2 weeks. I can also pursue get a little bit more of an understanding of the rules of order questions to figure out exactly under what circumstances you could potentially do a subcommittee meeting before a council vote on it, maybe if both of you close the public hearings. I don't know what the possibilities are there and how that process actually works, if you can do some sort of joint deliberation, and if that's not workable, you can recommend something that starts the process over again to do that if you think that's the workable option. If there's another level of a way to do this, we'll try to figure out what it is. But either way, if we can get something that gives you a direction to the council, even if that is to tell the council you want to start over on the 16th, so they know what to do on the 17th when they look at this again, that's the one thing I need. Is I can't go back with complete silence on the 17th, even if it's just we need more time. I just need to give them some direction on where this process is going. So if that's the way you choose to go with it, that's fine.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman, please.
So this ordinance, I assume that this ordinance really was something, the ideas that were hatched out of the planning department based on difficulties we had with the Marginal Street development, in your desire to do some long-term planning, that was offered to the city council, not something that necessarily the zoning subcommittee has been driving. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, as I mentioned last time, Councilor Broderick made the motion, but he made it after we had conversations with him about where we thought some of the gaps were in this process.
Right. So while I do think that it certainly wouldn't hurt to meet with the zoning subcommittee and make sure everybody's on the same page, and we get everybody's concerns boiled out before we go forward with something, I suspect that the feelings we get from the planning department are probably consistent with the same message we would get from the zoning subcommittee if we were to meet with them. What I'm getting at is, I don't know how much really would be gained by meeting with the zoning subcommittee. I am wide open to that. Be very willing to do that. I just don't know if we gain a lot by meeting with them. I think maybe we gain as much by talking with the planning department about what their motivation was. And I suspect that the zoning subcommittee and the city council is sort of looking to us to hash out the technical details and offer something to them that we think works. And they probably will, respect that. But, if the body wants to, and in order to meet with the zoning subcommittee, we need to do something. We need to close this hearing one way or another tonight. If that, we don't think that that's something we need to do, then we can keep it open and neighborhood will be more satisfied and we can go from there. And then we always have the option on the 16th, if we decide that, there's some roadblock, some other issue has come up, we get feedback from the council that there's an issue, we always have the option of, once again, delaying or voting it down at that point.
I think, basically on that, if we continue the public hearing to the 16th, we can digest everything that we received here this evening, and then we still have all those same options that we have available to us tonight, but have a chance to get more feedback from some of the concerns that we mentioned to you, that you could look into the procedural matters that have been raised. And then on the 16th, we could either vote for it, vote to deny it, and request that we have more feedback with the zoning subcommittee.
We could also invite members of the zoning subcommittee to join us at the public hearing on the 16th and provide
Always welcome.
their feedback.
Yeah. So, I think if we put it over for a 2-week period, keep the public hearing open, and that way, if anybody does show up, be willing to entertain their thoughts. But I think it gives us a chance to digest it with you. I know Mr. Fischett said he'd like more time. I think that some of the neighbors' concerns they'd like more time to digest it and come back and give us their comments and their feedback. And as the board, we always welcome that. So I think if we put it over for 2 weeks, we get all the concerns addressed. If some of the board members feel at that point in time we should start anew, then we'll have further discussion, listen to everybody else's opinion open-mindedly, and we can pursue that. So I don't think by continuing it, we're shortchanging anything at all. We still have all the same options, because then we can still make our recommendation to the council the following evening.
And if you'd like, the administration can reach out to the council members on the zoning subcommittee, and if it is within reason on their procedure, and I have to double check that, but I believe they took testimony and closed their public hearing, if I understood correctly. I'd have to double check, but if so, they may be able to be invited on the 16th to participate if that would, and get an idea of their level of concern and interest in that.
Well, you mentioned something, Judge, Mr. Chairman, is I believe the city council, and I know Ms. Fujione was there, they kept their public meeting open So I think that would prevent anybody from the zoning subcommittee to come here and speak on the issue.
It would prevent them
That's
from
correct.
deliberating on the issue, yes,
Yes.
if they'd kept it open, and we could, and a couple of us were there, and I'd have to go back and check exactly how the mayor handled the motion when it was made,
Yeah.
and what position the council was in at that point. I can't remember, but you're right, if they kept it open, that may further limit it. But I've got a little bit of procedural homework to do here to sort some of this stuff out, and I can pursue that and get back to you and figure out where to go with this.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily stuck on the fact that we have to meet with zoning subcommittee. If, as Mr. Gendron said, if the idea basically originated with the Division of Planning and Development, and it just came through the zoning subcommittee, and they're looking to us to, formulate the ordinance in the way that we see best, then that's fine. Then that's what we do. I have no objection to that, and I think we're well on our way to doing that. But, without any give and take from them, I don't know that that's in fact the case. If it is, fine, then we can perhaps put it together, in the next 2 weeks and present in a form that, everybody's comfortable with. But for that to happen, I think what we need to do is to incorporate the changes that you've made and that we've discussed, and that, we have to discuss it over the next 2-week period, so that we're not 2 weeks from now making additional changes and having to present them the next night to the council. I think by the next meeting, we have to see what our proposed changes are, perhaps go back and forth over the next couple of weeks, so that we can see them ahead of time and make any comments and get a comprehensive document before us in 2 weeks that we can say, looks good or it doesn't.
Yeah, all right.
Well, let me do this for you. I can package together what we've got. I can put all of the amendments that were in today's proposal package into that so that you can see what it looks like. I can look at some of the additional suggestions made and sort of highlight them and incorporate them as well, so you can take a look at what that would potentially do in addition to the document. I can do them in like different color highlights so you can see what's what. I can get that out to you in the next couple of days so you can see it. If you'd like, I can reach out and try to find the answer to where the council's position was on all of this. I mean, I can't necessarily read their minds, but my perception from the meeting was that the discussion at the council meeting sort of centered generally around the idea that, that the planning board was going to sort out some of the challenges in this, and they were sort of looking to see where the next direction on that was, but what level of interest they may have in participating in that and how that can work. I can try my best to find out the answers to that, which is a bit difficult to do in the middle of a public hearing, in the under the form of the way our government interacts. But I can try my best to see if I can get to the bottom of some of those questions, and then based upon all of that, get back some feedback to you, and then hopefully give you some direction for where to go with all of this on the 16th.
Well, if you get stuck before the council, just blame us. You said, well, that's what the planning board want. I'm just speaking on their behalf, but I think, saying that all done, do you think we should make a motion to continue for 2 weeks?
That's exactly what I was going to do, Mr. Chairman.
Go right ahead then, Mr.
I'd like to
Fischel.
make a motion that we continue the public hearing for 2 weeks.
I'll second.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes yes. So we'll continue this matter to November 16th for further public hearing. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. We appreciate your input. Thank you. If you make any of those changes ahead of time, and if anybody from the public would like to see a copy of those, could they address you and you can give them a copy so they don't come in on the night before, if you have them?
I think we'll try to get together with George.
Okay.
We haven't exactly.
I'm just thinking that way, if you come in that night, you'd like to see him and digest them. If he has them ahead of time, we'll give you a chance to digest them, same as ourselves, okay?
Right. Now, we have email addresses, so we can
Oh,
share
okay.
that. We can share that.
I'd like to
information.
share with you our comments, so you see what we hear and give you a chance to reflect on them as well, and comment. All right, thank you very much, appreciate you being here tonight. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, appreciate it all. Thank you. Moving along in the agenda, we have some notices from abutting towns, and we have some other correspondences. Nothing mainly concerning from the abutting towns. Entertain a motion to place those on file.
So move.
Okay, those motions are placed on file. We don't have any ZBA notices this evening. We gave our recommendation on all of those at our last public hearing. We do have some general correspondences that were given to us in regards to A&R plan and a couple other plans. Those are just on communication level. Any further general correspondence from the Division Plan and Development?
I just wanted to give you guys an update on some of the things you've asked for in the last couple meetings. the legal opinion on the cell tower. It was on the legal department's staff meeting today to discuss and assign. So they're working on an opinion. I think it's quite close. And then I believe there was also a motion that was on the city council to actually look into the ordinance itself. So that may change if we look into the ordinance a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, Aaron, if I could just add to that a little bit, and I was going to share some documents with you, because I know that motion from the city council, the council was at the NEMCOG meeting with me when I brought that up, and asked the other towns and communities to share what they're doing and what they have on their books relative to cell phone towers. And I know I did speak to Tewksbury, and I spoke to Bill Ricker, and I will get back to you with some of the, some of the innovative ways that they've tried to kind of direct it. I mean, everybody understands the challenge. I mean, it's limited what you can do. It really is. But some wording in all of the approval letters in Tewksbury, they put, in the future, it's determined that there are some health issues that they agree to, dismantle the tower. And I know in Billerica, and I believe both in Tewksbury, they have preferred sites, which they try to direct them to municipal sites, because actually there's a great source of revenue for municipalities, but it's written in the zoning code. So, again, we do have the motion was welcomed on the council floor to try to get as much resources on this. We do have the obviously zoning ordinance relative to that, but I think it deserves looking at and see if we can strengthen that and come up with some innovative ways to try to at least direct it and see if we can, first of all, get some revenue from it. And I don't even know where we are on that right now. And as a matter of fact, one of the towns, even though we always have the companies come here with their own engineering studies, but they require an independent engineering study on that as well. And I think that's something that, I think that those are all options we need to look at. I'll try to get all of those documents and share them with the DPD as well, to see what we can do with that. But, again, hopefully that will be helpful. And one of the communities, Westford, what they did is we have site plan review here, but the special permit of the zoning board of appeals, what they do is they have everything at the planning board. If you're going to see it for site plan, you're going to also handle the special permit as well. So again, there will be more to put out there, and I know DPD has very competent staff to look at that, but I think we can get as many eyes looking at this. I believe even the zoning board of appeals now is looking for a little bit more guidance on this as well. So. Yeah,
I think that's very helpful. Right now, as far as requiring an applicant to provide, a second look at engineering studies, the special permit that we have now allows that. The zoning board of appeals could do that if they could require it if they so wished, as well as the planning board and any special permit that you have that option. So that is certainly, we haven't really exercised that much, and I don't think ever since I've been here, but it is there. And there's certainly different ways of allocating or different ways of applying the board review for special permits, and we definitely break it up, which may be a challenge, but we welcome any kind of comments, any kind of assistance from neighboring towns. It's kind of how ordinances are drafted, really. It's just kind of picking and choosing who does it the best. But as far as the limit of the review, whether it's the special permit from the zoning board of appeals or in the site plan review of a new tower, you should have some opinion. You should have an opinion from the legal department, so at least in the meantime, because there is a rash of new projects, new proposals coming through. I think it's just that cell providers need a greater bandwidth these days. Everybody's got the iPhone, I guess. I don't know, but that should be coming along, hopefully soon. And then I looked a little bit into the Mullins rule. Joe, you had requested looking into the Mullins rule, which allows a board member to vote in the case that they're absent at a meeting, as long as they attest to the fact that they viewed the entire meeting by video or audio tape, I believe, with the two options. Minutes don't count. It has to be the full video, so you can capture the whole meeting. That's a council vote. What we can do is we can, at the planning, we've actually been wanting to do this for a while, so we can actually initiate it in the planning department to move that up and have the legal department actually draft an ordinance to allow the boards to initiate the Mullins rule.
So obviously, we can see a copy of that before you send it forward?
Yeah.
Okay. And I
So,
think,
on that matter, Mr. Chairman, so how would that work? Would the vote actually be delayed in the cases where
Yeah.
there were absent members?
Yeah, you would have to, you wouldn't take the vote at the hearing or the meeting. You would have to be continued, and you could close the, it's very topical, you could close the public hearing and continue the agenda item for a vote. But it would allow the absent member to view on TV or on video the meeting, and then, basically, there's a number of forms, we'd have to work on the form as well, but attest to the fact that you watched it and complete, and then the next meeting, you could actually participate in the vote.
Vote's not required to be delayed. You could take a vote of 4 members if you so desired. But for projects that go on for 2 and 3 meetings, if someone misses one, it's helpful. And in a lot of cases, someone will come in even for a new application, and it'll be just 4 members. They won't want to go forward, even though all the neighbors are here, and they don't want to open it up because there's only 4 members available. So what you could do is tell them we have 4 members. We could take the public testimony today and vote on it when we have all 5, and we could have the 5th member attest that he's seen the tape and give the 5th member an opportunity to ask questions at, at that point and vote.
like before, so for a period of time there, we only had 4 board members while we're waiting approval of a new board member. So on the special permit, we needed 4 people to vote. So say if one of the 4 of us didn't make that meeting, we couldn't vote on it, or if one person even had a conflict for some reason, if only the 4, then they couldn't get the 4 votes.
Right.
So with the 4 of us, if one person was absent due to whatever reason may be, unavailability for some reason, we could go back and review the prior hearing, being brought up to date, and then we continue to the next hearing, then they'd have the ability to vote. So what happens is it came up before, and it's been adopted in other cities and towns, so it gives that person the flexibility to pull themselves up to date and then be allowed to say, okay, I am familiar with the prior testimony and what the concerns were, and obviously, as we all do, read all the comments in the packet, and that way, instead of starting, because that case, if we stopped it, they don't have it, you gotta start the whole process anew.
Right.
And I think,
Makes sense.
like indicated, I know when I missed the meeting, my daughter brought up on the computer. I could watch the whole thing on the computer anytime you want now.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go to the library anymore or catch the replays. And of course, I know how to fix the computer, but she showed me how to do it, and I got to watch it. I'm like, wow, so you can watch it at your leisure. So it's pretty easy to get up to date now with all the technology. And then, hear everybody's concerns, so we can start the public hearing, continue it, have that board member come in. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they have to sign off on something. They indicated that they truly hereby attest to swear that they have.
The board member has to certify that they have viewed the tape,
Right.
and that has to be done prior to the vote. You can't do it
Right.
subsequently.
Yeah, and so that would just, I think, help
Yeah.
the applicants who are present, especially when you have a big public hearing, and especially when it's been drawn out over a period of time. I know we don't have that problem usually here. I think the most, we've done maybe 2 or 3 meetings, but we tried to come to a resolution. I know in other cities and towns, some get a lot more lengthy, as you can attest to. And, after 7 or 8 meetings, you can understand where people are more unavailable, and then you come back. So I think we're pretty good about moving it along, vote it up, down, concerns, and sometimes we continue it out and get more input. And, and a lot of times we do it at the agreement of them, applicants and the public to sit down and fine tune it, let them meet with each other, harass, sit down and work out their issues. So I think it's a good mechanism to keep the application moving forward.
It also, may add a level of comfort to ask for some of those additional studies, third-party studies, whether it's for transportation for a project or a cell tower, if you're looking for a second look on the engineering. You can be a little bit more comfortable requiring that, knowing you're not slowing it too much in case a board member can't make the next meeting or the one after. It does add a little bit more flexibility. And then just 2 other items. Clark Road, 133 Clark Road, I got a communication from Mr. Flood that they're working with the new engineer to, update a plan for a mitigation strategy So we should be hearing from them. It's not over. I don't think they were just going to
And
withdraw.
I know that night, when we did that site visit, Mr. Camacho said he's gonna put something in writing to us as well. You have any communication with him about that?
I have not. I think,
He told us on site he would, so if he could just...
okay. Yeah, I'll follow up with.
Yeah, I mean, he said to me, we'll get something in writing, we'll get it back to you. And I said, okay, so we welcome that input as well, obviously. So.
And then,
Aaron, on the Clark Road issue, I had sent you a note today. I was wondering if it's possible to get, because we've had so much discussion about that site, a brief chronology of events that have taken place there. I know we had the initial special permit there was for the 5 lots. That was several years ago, and then that was amended to be the 2-lot scenario, and I think we had the site plan approval for that. Did we not?
I think it's special permit.
You mean special permit for length of driveway?
There was 2 different special permits, one for the driveway, then one for reduced frontage.
Right.
Okay, but wasn't there didn't we review the site plan when the plan changed from the 5 lots to the 2 lots?
Yeah, in that special permit review, there's a site plan that you reviewed.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that, yeah.
Because anytime there's this, that would have been a substantial change to the, that would have been essentially adding another lot to the site. That would have required site plan review in and of itself, would it not have? Even if there weren't a driveway length?
No, just, it's the trigger for site plan reviews is 3 or more residential units. So since it was just 2 buildings, 2 residential units, it didn't trigger site plan review.
Right.
But I can certainly put together a chronology. I can try to have it for the next meeting. It might take me a little bit longer just digging through the files, but I can certainly have it prior
Yeah,
to.
I'm trying to, if I wanted to go back and review some of those meetings, get Tom's daughter to download it on the computer for me, and I can review some of the things that happened there, then, so I'm just looking for dates and times and what we actually did there.
I can get you minutes as well if you want.
Okay, that'd be great.
The last one was Julian Steele. I just wanted to bring the board up to date on that one. The motion that was made in the last meeting was to approve the request to release 5 lots according to the covenant, and the conditions placed on the subdivision special permit approval. There were still formally 75 lots that had already been released, and the maximum was 70. So what we were able to do, because they had a closing on Friday, I believe, was that we determined in my conversation with Dennis that there were, Dennis Connors, who represents LDFC, that there was, I think, 14 to 16 lots that had been erroneously released, that they didn't need released. So what we did was file the conformatory Form D to basically consolidate all the lots that had been released in the past, and then basically taking those away that officially unreleasing the lots that they didn't need released, and then releasing the 5 that they were requesting. So now we have it, so it's clear. There's no question of what's what, and then we have a single Form D that consolidates everything, listing out every single lot, and then the one that was approved last. So that hopefully should clarify the issue going forward, and there won't be any more last-minute kind of pain. But that's it.
Thank you. Any of the board members have any further correspondences? The only thing I would suggest is tomorrow, as we know, is November 3rd, which is Election Day, so I would encourage all those who are eligible to go out and vote to please do so. After saying that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Motion made and second. All in favor, say aye. Chair votes yes. Good night, and thank you, everyone.